Hello everyone, my name is Wilma, you're watching NB Reads, and today I'm going to talk about the 12 books that I read in the first quarter of 2026, January, February, March, and these are some of them. The first book I read this year was Universal Love by Alexander Weinstein. This is a book that I've had on my TBR for such a long time, and I kind of wanted to start off the year with reading something a little bit fast-paced, like something completely different from what I have been reading, which is a lot of like queer books in general. This is a short story collection, and it's all about kind of how technology influences our life. It's a critique of technology. But I really did not like this book. Every story is about like, this is a human innovation and this is how it's ruining these people's lives. And it was just so depressing and it didn't contribute like anything to the conversation. It just felt very on the nose of like, if you don't treasure your human relationships and technology keeps developing the way it does, then things are going to go to shit. It just didn't contribute anything new to the conversation. It didn't make me feel like motivated to be more conscientious about how I use technology. And the way that the stories were like so much on the nose of technology is bad, it almost felt like the futuristic wives' tales out of like, this is an old fairy tale that teaches us this lesson. And I just didn't think that the book had a lot of nuance, whether in like the characters or the themes, and it was just very depressing. But I wanted to pick this up like a long time ago when I bought it because I think it's a very interesting subject, and when it contains nuance and the technology is like very out there and cool or very different, and it reveals like aspects of our humanity that are like maybe parts we haven't considered with technology, or like it explores that, I feel like it could be so interesting. And I think that's why I even more so was like super disappointed with this book. I gave it 1.5 stars. Rough time for the start of the year. I've noticed that I have like started kind of picking up short story collections for the first book of the year, and it's been like a complete coincidence. But I'm enjoying this trend of mine, even though this was a flop. Next up, I picked up Worthy of the Event by Vivian Blaxell. We read this for the Small Queer Press book club in January, and it is work by Little Puss Press, which I now made a goal to read all of their publications, which I'm really excited about, especially with like the following ones that have come out since this book. But this is essentially like an essay collection in a way. It kind of mixes like memoir and philosophy and history and anthropology all mixed together into this like woven tapestry that connects all these dots, or like attempts to connect all these dots, and brings you through like Vivian's thoughts and experiences. I was interested in reading this as well because it is from like an older transsexual woman, and I appreciate like hearing her voice, but at the same time you can really tell that she is older. She kind of like pulls references from both people that are known to be like very problematic and people who are very progressive in like their politics, and makes her own like thoughts about whether these ideas are good or bad, and it doesn't really come to much, but she's very good, I guess, holding like nuance. But I felt like the title Worthy of the Event kind of like tries to discuss this concept of like everything that exists or happens, or everything is like worthy of something, and what does it mean to be worthy of the event, or like to become an event. And I think it could have been done really well. I didn't have like this aha moment or like this feeling that I was with Vivian on her journey. It just didn't tie together the way I hoped, because I think I can really adore books that sort of like weave this tapestry, and throughout like experiencing all these things, like whether it's well written or not, like comes to some sort of whole picture towards the end, and that just didn't happen, which was really disappointing. And I think it's very possible that I'm like a little bit too dumb for this book, to be honest, and that I will really appreciate it in like 30 years or something. But right now, I gave this 2.5 stars. I wasn't a fan of like how little I understood, and there were like memoir aspects of the book, like certain relationships or conversations or people she's had in her life that was so interesting to read about, and I really wanted more of that. Next, I picked up Binti Home. This is the second book in Nadia Okorafo's Binti series. I've been so good with trying to like keep up with series that I read because I don't read a lot of series anymore. And this is a short one, you know, like I can do this and I will try to pick up the third one as soon as possible because I don't want to leave it too long in between. But I can't really like say too much about this volume specifically, but you know, the first one, she spends like her time in an aircraft and the whole setting is in the aircraft before she goes to this planet. And this is kind of like she's home again. I feel like that's not a spoiler. And the world is very reminiscent of Dune, but more from like an Afrofuturistic lens. We get to learn more about like her hometown, her family connections, the way that like her family feels about her now that she's chosen a life path that isn't maybe as appreciated by her community. And she really struggles. This book, I feel like, really explores her anxiety, how she deals with it, how it like shows up for her. I think I felt frustrated at times with her not seeing like the ways that her beliefs and her ideas of the world like limit her understanding and ability to like connect with others or overcome her anxiety, but that's also like the whole point of the book, you know? I just feel frustrated for her. But we got to learn so much more about the lore when it comes to like the magic and the science, where she comes from, which is such a huge part of like her abilities and all that. The book is both like fantasy and science fiction, and I think I still want to learn more. Like I don't fully grasp how everything works, but I think this book brought a lot of context, and I'm really excited to see how she like comes into her own, overcomes like her anxiety, possibly learn more about like her history, her culture, and the world, the epic sci-fi world. It is written in a way where so many different ages can read this book and really appreciate it. And while I appreciate a book that does that, where like someone in middle school and like an older person can all read this, I think that it's not my favorite way of like communicating in a book when it becomes like a little bit simplistic. Like I 100% could have used 100 more pages exploring Binti's mind because there's so much there. But I gave this book 3.25 stars. It's very, if you liked, you know, Binti, the first one, you'll like the second one. It's very similar in tone, and my thoughts and feelings are pretty much the same. Next, I picked up another short story collection. This is Crawl by Max Delson. This was one of my most like anticipated books of 2025. So I was obviously super excited to pick it up. This follows trans men in Seattle, and it feels very auto-fictitious without actually knowing if it is or not. But a lot of the stories felt super similar in tone, and also all the trans men in this feel like they have a very similar idea of how they feel about their transness, their manhood, their experience. They didn't have like a lot of versatility, and I think personally I enjoy short story collections that feel like they're either very diverse in the types of stories they're trying to tell, or even like exploring one theme in different ways, or if you want to interconnect them like a lot, to have like these Easter eggs that that pass through the different stories. Like I think that's super cool. And I think what Max could have done here is to have like, this is like the world of trans men in Seattle, and then follow these characters that kind of at points like interconnect a little bit, but they have their experiences that are very different. Like I think I would really appreciate that. And I also wish that the stories felt like they were written kind of for a trans reader. They feel a little bit ambiguous as to who this is written for. I think anyone cis or trans could read this and really appreciate it, but it does over explain some things that I felt like very unnecessary to do. And I think just having things be as they are without like over explaining or catering to certain people's lack of understanding could have really benefited this book, to be honest. But there was a lot of funny moments. There's a lot of good dialogue. I just wish that the stories had like more narrative and point of view diversity. But I bet a lot of trans men are really going to relate to this book, and I appreciate it for that. And I gave it 3.25 stars. So this is where you notice I might have had a little bit of a bleak start of the year, because so far we still have not had over 3.25 rating of any of these books, and that will not change with the next one either. So this is The Swimmers by Marianne Womack. I've had this on my physical TBR for such a long time, and because it is a climate fiction, and I used to read a lot of climate fiction, be really into just like books that explore climate change in fiction. That's the name. This is a near-future dystopian world where climate change has ravaged the planet. There are like jungles everywhere, and animals have been changed into different types of like monstrous creature for whatever reason, and the world is divided between the upper settlement, which is like a ring in the atmosphere, and the lower settlement or like earth dwellers. And we follow Pearl, who grew up in this jungle on Earth, and the plot progresses there. I don't know if I can fully recount what actually happened if someone asked me about the plot of this book. It feels very all over the place. We do like flashbacks from into the future, back in time. We talk about like class struggle and family secrets and dynamics between different people. And it feels a lot like the author had an idea for this world, and that the story is kind of just there to like prop up the world. But because of that, I felt like neither the story or the world building was fully given the time and justice it deserved to be like explored in a way that made sense. I think there's a lot of parts to this world. It's a little bit like too vast and too complex, and the author really tried to like put all these little details of like how things came to be and like storytelling and lore interwoven into this book when it's just like, I don't know, a 400-page literary novel. It just felt very overly complicated in a way, and I do think that some of it is really interesting. Like, I loved the idea of how much storytelling matters, both in terms of like propaganda, but also in like reclaiming power, which is like kind of a theme that comes up a little bit later in the book. There is in the beginning of the book this very sapphic relationship that kind of just dies a little bit. It's not really like explored, and then later in the book when the characters meet at some point, there's just no mention of like their lover connection, which I found kind of frustrating because I was given some hope that this book that I thought was completely cishet might have some representation in it, but I just now I'm thinking I misread the first part, even though there was kissing, which makes me feel gaslit by the author. I just really wish this book was like more concise and like the storytelling was more tight and clear, because I was definitely confused at times and it just feels very mushy, the way it travels back and forth in time, and I felt really frustrated with it because the concept is so good. So I gave it 2.75 stars. And then I picked up Ghost Driver by Nell Osborne. I was obviously sold on this cover because it is so stunning. This is sort of like a dream-like, possibly near futuristic, but possibly just told a little strange set in our world about this woman who deals with the chronic pain, and she's unable to figure out from any doctors why she's experiencing this pain, where it's coming from. There's just no answers. She has this boyfriend that is the most manly man shithole, typical man, and she works at this corporate job that just doesn't recognize her as a human and her human needs at all. And the best part about this book, the most impeccable, amazing part, is the fact that it's written so well. Like the writing style, the text, like the structure, the way that it's told in sentences, prose, I guess you would call that, is so good. I just appreciate the writing so much. 5 stars for the writing. Really enjoyed it. I had so much fun with the writing. Now, the story as a whole, I really thought it would go weirder. It has this feeling that there's weird stuff going on. It doesn't feel like quite right, but there is nothing super strange happening maybe until the end. I really thought that the answer to like her pain and stuff would be that she was like being controlled by lice, or her body was filled up with lice on the inside, which I think still would be pretty cool. But spoiler alert, that's not what happens. It's not the ghost driver that's driving her. Every chapter felt a little bit like, in this chapter we're going to be exploring her relationship to her boyfriend, and then in this chapter we're going to be exploring chronic pain, and in this chapter we're going to be exploring beauty standards. And it kind of felt a little bit like every chapter we were focusing on a thing or trying to talk about something, but it sort of didn't lend its hand to create a bigger narrative structure that made sense or felt like it added to the plot of the book. I really appreciate the ending. Really glad I read this. I just wish there was more lore that would explain the ending, the climax, the conclusion that was riddled throughout the novel, because a lot of it feels very normal, and at the same time maybe that's intentional because maybe it's in our world. but all of it also felt a little bit off, and I wish there was more backstory and things like stuff like the end riddled throughout it. And I could have really loved this because the language was so good. I ended up giving it 3.75 stars. After that, I picked up this book called Pornography for the End of the World by Brendan Vidito. This is a short story collection, a short story collection that is about apocalypse, horniness, gore. It is exactly what you think it is by the sound of the title and the cover. There are worms and nastiness and sex, and it's just like a little bit gross. And a part of me really enjoyed the process of just seeing how much I could stomach, because at some points when I finished like reading certain parts, I definitely felt ill afterwards. It does get a little cosmic at times. It's very body horror-y. It's super existential, and it's all mixed in together in a way that just makes you feel so icky. And I think what I appreciate about this book is the fact that even though it's written by a cis man, a lot of the stories feel very critical of his gender, and the stereotypes, the misogyny, and the ways in which like men fall short in general when it comes to relationships, and in the beliefs that they had. Like a lot of it was a critique on that, at least the way I read it. I hope that's true, because it could have easily become just such a like masochistic jerk off to have written all these things, because it is so extreme and almost revels in it. But it didn't feel that way, which I'm really happy about. Actually, I really would love to read a book like this that is written by like a queer person, or I don't know, a person of color, or that had kind of like the same energy and uniqueness in the stories, but maybe had like a different theme or something like that. I think the writing just really wasn't that great. It kind of just was there to communicate the themes and the story and present the story, but it didn't do anything in itself, and there were like some spelling mistakes and stuff like that. So it's all around like pretty bland, but it's all about the stuff that's happening, the plot. There are just so many descriptions of like fluids and merging of body parts, cosmic creatures, like gross cosmic creatures, and it was very visceral the way I saw it in my mind. Huge trigger warning for like everything. And I ended up giving it 3 stars. After that, I picked up Persona by Oifi Josie Clemens. This is another book by Little Puss Press for our small queer press book club at the Pond. This is a horror. I'm so glad I read this. Really love this book. Spoiler alert. This has like, oh, in a weird way, similar vibes to Pornography for the End of the World, but it is queer. Written by a trans woman. You follow this person who is living in her own mess. She's really depressed, ended things with her boyfriend recently. She discovers a porn video of herself on the internet, which then spirals. And this book is told in like different parts from some different perspectives. It gets like a little, I guess, a little cosmic horror-y and just rather dark in general. It's a little bit difficult to talk about this book because there is a huge mystery element of like what is going on, right? Like, what is this porn video of her that she can't remember? Like, is her memory lacking? Is there someone else who looks like her? Is this an alternate dimension, alternate reality? There was so many different like scenarios that I was going through in my head of like what could actually be going on. And I really, really appreciated the mystery element of this book because it gets so dark, and the focus on like her mental health and everything she's struggling with, and all the, I don't know, trauma that she's gone through to be where she is today. It's a lot of like really, really heavy things, and I think the mystery really helped me to keep me like float when it comes to being able to like process everything that was happening. It gets a little wild, and the ending gets even wilder, and it does not give you all the answers, and I really love it when it does that. It gave us some answers. There's a lot of like themes and reflections that I could talk about, but I don't really want to spoil the experience of this book. But there is like a fuck capitalism element if you like reading stories like that. It's about mental health, and it's also just kind of a really cool book. I enjoyed the conversation we had, like about this book a lot because everyone had such different theories of what did the ending mean, you know, what is the author saying? That was really fun, especially like with a horror like this. Highly recommend. Gave it 4.75 stars. Also just love the format of this. You can tell it's like long and thin. And I'm always just so obsessed with books with different formats. Wrote all my little theories and highlighted a bunch of stuff. Highly recommend. Then I picked up this comic called Leo Rising by Archie Bongiovanni, who also wrote Mimosas, which is like an adult queer friend group comic that I really loved. And this is their newer release. And I, of course, like, that's why I wanted to pick it up, but also because I am also a Leo Rising. So I, of course, had to read this book. Maybe I would gain some introspection upon myself. It takes place in a city in Alaska where you're following these two best friends who are lesbians in their 30s, and all they do is kind of go to the same bar every night. It's not a queer bar, it's just like their local bar, and they don't really hang out so much with other people. They're not really connected to like any other queer people that much, and our main character has like an online following of lesbian community, and she's like a lesbian influencer. And this story is basically about kind of like how she gets very disillusioned with, you know, the community she has online versus the community that she has in person, and just starts to feel so much more connected and understood by the people online rather than like her best friend. Because there's never a point where, you know, these two friends kind of like want to know more about like, is there other queer people in our town, like can we find a physical community? So it is sort of about like, you know, we can't get too caught up in the online spaces and the feeling of community when there's so much physical community to be found face to face, physically in real life, and that it can't like take away from your relationships. Appreciate the people who are in your life. Sort of that's the story. I found the main character, insufferable. Is this like one of those things where like if there's so much like you start to dislike them? Perhaps. But I wish that the book went a little bit deeper, to be honest. I think Archie's really good at like writing these funny characters and funny scenes and great dialogue, and it feels very like practiced, like the art style and the storytelling. But I wish it went like a little bit deeper and felt a little bit more realistic, perhaps, because it feels very comic-y. I hope that makes sense. Instead of creating more realistic characters, perhaps, like the characters are still very comic characters. But I liked this book. I thought it was fine. It was not as good as Mimosas, but I think Archie does even better with more characters because then, you know, they don't need to create such fully fleshed out characters. They can just have fun with dynamics and include important conversations, but it doesn't need to be so focused. And maybe that's why I like this one less, but definitely still worth the read. I gave it 3.5 stars. So a really, really long time ago, I got an arc sent to me called Ocean's Something, Ocean's End, by this author, Verena Maxwell. This is Winter's Orbit. It's another book by her called Ocean's End or something like that. And I got this book sent with that arc, and then I never read any of them. But I was in the mood to kind of like pick up something different. I've never read like a romance sci-fi, and I thought, why not? I'm trying to be better at reading my physical TBR, my backlisted TBR. So I picked this one up, and I'm glad I did. I don't know how to explain this book without getting too much into the plot. Essentially, we follow two characters, one whose boyfriend, partner, husband just died, and another who needs to marry this guy so they can secure the treaty between their planet and other planets in the galactical system. There's a bunch of more to it, but it's sort of like a set up marriage. And there are so many different parts of this book. There is, of course, like the romance of these two people having to get to know each other, having to be in a relationship, and also the fact that they need to because of the political system. And then there's the mystery of like who killed that other guy, Jainan's husband. And I think the book really managed to balance these different genres really well. Like I felt equally invested into like the romance, the mystery, and the world building, which I really appreciated. I think possibly people who read romance would like this more than people who read sci-fi who are interested in the romance, because there is like a lot of they're all equally kind of like drive the plot forward, but there is a heavier, I think, maybe focus on the relationship aspect of it. I was personally really frustrated at how the characters just would not communicate, and I guess that is sort of the main problem in relationships is like communication, so there's no shocking there. But if they would have just talked to each other, they would have realized so many things about how they feel. But we're on that journey and we eventually get there. I will say though, I feel conflicted about the fact that I kind of predicted what would happen in the book. Both kind of predicted parts of their backstories that weren't revealed, as well as who the bad guy is. And I wish I would have not predicted it, let's just say, or maybe predicted parts of it, because I predicted it almost to a T, and that's just not fun, even though it's satisfying. I also wish the book was a little bit more critical of like empire, and I thought maybe it was going to be more decolonial than it sort of ended up being, which is maybe more critique of like armies and military rather than the empire itself maybe being not so good. It is very like queer normative, which is cool. I'm just not a romance girly, and so this is kind of very new for me. But I think like the character work in this was exceptional. It was really, really well done, and the pace was really well done. And I think maybe I will pick up that arc, the other book of this author, because I had some success with romance sci-fi post reading this book. So maybe that is a genre I need to get into more. And gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read or listened to the audiobook of One Day Everyone Will Always Have Been Against This by Omar El Akkad, which has been recommended to everyone for like the past year or more. I've seen so many people read this, and obviously like the title is really catching. And I was really interested in the audiobook because he narrates it himself. It is so good. I highly recommend the audiobook if you have access to that. It is basically like about his experience being an immigrant moving to the US, kind of this idea of being like promised a better life, of being like a father, and talking about all the ways the West sort of lies to you about the promises they make, and just how so many different types of people are not really considered human and their struggles are not part of values and things to fight for. And it talks about all these different instances of the West lying. It feels extremely human. It's such a good mix of memoir, like personal stories of history of like different countries, different political situations, conversations. I mean, our author is like a journalist, and the way that it's written and in the way that it's told feels so good. Like the storytelling, it feels like very powerful. And I think we're so there with the author when he talks about like even his hopelessness and the way he feels coming to certain realization and reporting on like different topics and his place in all these different conversations. And then we come around to from his hopelessness to feeling the power we have. It feels like a whole book that is sort of like a call to action for everyone to stand up for each other, like to connect with our global community. I think for me, even though I didn't catch all the details when I'm listening to it as an audiobook, I don't remember all the details of like political situations or facts around certain dates and like all these different things. But it is one of those books that I can easily re-listen to and gain like that spirit of, right, these are my values, this is what I believe in, this is what I want to fight for. And I think that that's like the power of this book, is that like call to action to like motivate you to keep fighting for what you believe in and for other people's like right and autonomy and freedom. It was just really good. I gave it 4.75 stars, mostly just because it's not a new favorite book, but it was really, really good. And I think maybe I would feel differently if I read it physically. I think anyone and everyone can read this book. It's so easy to get into. I think as a reader, you're also really cared for within like these heavy subjects. So really good book. Highly recommend. Then the last book I read in the last quarter of this year was Unsex Me Here by Aurora Matia, which is the author of The Fifth Wound, which I really loved, and I was really excited to pick up her short story collection. Initially, I didn't love this book as much as I loved The Fifth Wound, but there are some interviews in the back where, you know, she really talks about her process of writing, the way she approaches the world, the way she uses writing to like express something that I found really special and made me feel like really close to her and see her writing in a more intentional way, and I really, really like that. I think I've read one of these before, and it appears in Be Gay, Do Crime, so I reread that one, which is like about this couple who starts kind of like forgetting things, and they're at a motel, and it's all about this drug thing, and then there was this character about these women searching for Aphrodite time, and I think what I appreciate about Aurora Matia is that the sentences sort of like run on in different directions, and sometimes she'll switch like tracks in mid-sentence about what she's saying, written in this like very maximalist way. It's a lot of words, she's saying a lot. I enjoy like the kind of rebellion against minimalism and just writing with effort, essentially. And I also really love like the references. Even when something is historical, there are like futuristic elements, or there's like references from today's date. Like it's all just enmeshed in this one world of Aurora Matia. And in this book, we also got like a lot more context around the characters and the storylines from The Fifth Wound, which was really fun to see. Some of the stories in here I also don't remember quite as well, like kind of stories from her growing up, or I assume from her growing up, and the church. Some of these parts like feel a little blurry, which I think I kind of get sometimes with her stories, just because there are so much to it, and they go in different plot directions and literary directions that don't make them very memorable, to be honest, and I think some of them even like blur together a little bit in my mind. There are some planes of existence where we match in vibration, and when I get there through her writing, it makes me feel stuff, which I really love. I gave it 4 stars, just slightly less than The Fifth One. So those were all the books that I read the first quarter of this year. Let me know if you read any of these, what your thoughts were on them. If you have any recommendations of something great you read recently, drop them down in the comments. I wish you all an amazing, beautiful day, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye!